All that all-star nonsense is over now. The race for the playoffs in Sacramento can truly begin. Kyle Madson from ESPN 1320's The Insiders joins me to talk about what the Kings have to do over the final 27 games to actually make the postseason. And should we still be looking at top 6, or should we just shift our attention to 7 and 8, the more ideal play-in spots? It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. Happy to call Kyle Madson a friend of mine here in Sacramento. If you're not familiar with Kyle's work, I mean, he hosts a fantastic show with James Ham, the Insiders, ESPN 1320 from 10 to noon, Monday through Friday, although they were off today for the holiday. Their content is fantastic. Kyle is excellent. He's also, if you're a 49ers fan and you're not following or familiar with Kyle, with the work that he does for Niners Wire and co-host of the Candlestick Chronicles podcast with Chris Biederman, I mean, he's just brilliant, right? And every opportunity I have to bring Kyle on this show and spend some time with Kyle and talk Kings or anything with Kyle, I relish in that opportunity. So to have Kyle here on Locked On Kings is always a real treat. And we're going to start out talking a little bit about All-Star Weekend, given our opinions on how the weekend went. And then we'll dive headfirst into the Kings conversation. We'll briefly talk about our long-term outlook for this roster and then focus in on the short term, what the Kings have to do to make the playoffs, where we expect them to end up in this playoff race. We'll look at this upcoming schedule and break down like key stretches and brutal stretches that the Kings will have to go through. And then at the very end too, we talk a little bit about Keon Ellis getting into the starting lineup and who Doug Christie should move out of the starting lineup, no matter how difficult that decision is. So a lot of great conversation here between myself and Kyle. I hope you enjoy it, and feel free to respond to anything that we talk about at Matt George Sack on Twitter or X, also on Blue Sky. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below if you're watching on YouTube, and please enjoy my conversation with Kyle Madson. I think we all appreciate the break part of the All-Star break, especially with how the Sacramento Kings ended their quote-unquote first half of the season, but also the anticipation to get this ball rolling again, especially with Friday night's big game between the Kings and the Golden State Warriors. It's starting to build with each passing day. Kyle Madson, a good friend of the Locked On Kings podcast. You hear him on The Insiders on ESPN 1320 with James Ham. And also, if you consider yourself a 49ers fan, you should be very familiar with the Candlestick Chronicles podcast and Niners Wire. Kyle Madson, nice enough to join me here on Locked On Kings. Kyle, before we get into anything Kings, we saw the new format of the All-Star game last night. Of course, no Kings representation in it. It was in a very familiar place for you, the Chase Center, home of the Warriors. Steph Curry wins MVP. He did everything he could to, in my opinion, save the All-Star game or make it as entertaining as possible. What did you make of All-Star Weekend and their new spin on everything?
Yeah, I like the idea. I think they can execute it better for sure, the tournament. I don't know if it's extending the score or making it certainly cutting down on the mid-game stuff. Like that Mr. Beast challenge went way too long. The ceremony for inside the NBA, I love those guys, but that was terrible. Yeah. That was, I mean, you want to make it about basketball. You're so worried that nobody cares about the basketball, and then you're going to make it about everything but the basketball. So I've given up on the All-Star game ever meaning anything ever again. I like the format. It seemed like the players were trying at least a little more than in years past. And I think if you can kind of set that precedent going forward and eliminate some of the mid-game antics, Like, dude, at some point during the weekend, I get it's a commercialized event. Like, if you were in the city, there were parties and live podcasts and exposés and all this other stuff. There was stuff everywhere. There's so much. It's such a commercialized thing that's fine on Friday. That's even fine on Saturday with the dunk contest and the 3-point shootout. But like at some point, if you want the players to give a dang about the basketball, you have to make the event about the basketball.
Right.
And it's never going to be the all-star game of the 80s and 90s again. But I think they're on the right track. I just didn't think that this weekend was particularly well executed.
I felt like the pendulum completely swung to the opposite side, to where the criticism has been, oh, players don't care enough, players aren't going to try very hard, and then you had players literally caught on broadcast looking around going, can we just play? Everybody shut up. The amount of players that were looking at Kevin Hart to just shut up, or that were telling the cameramen to get off the court. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at one point was like, just move, go, like get off the court so we can play basketball. I'm not a fan of the All-Star game. Is not for me. I'm not a target audience member for the All-Star game. This was even worse. It was just commercialized nonsense.
Right. Who is that? That's what I want to know. And you say you're not the target audience. I think I would disagree, but who is? Who's this for? My folks. I always go back to my parents. My parents are in their 60s, but they are big sports fans, but not like in the way that they're subscribing to Locked On podcasts and like they're, deep diving in the Athletic or anything like that. Like, no, they're gonna watch the games. They're gonna have thoughts. But that doesn't appeal to them. They're both like, ew, like, no, I don't want that. Yeah. We're both huge basketball fans. It doesn't appeal to us. So if you're not getting the casual fan and you're not getting the huge basketball fan, who are you getting? I think it's a business. I think it's like for all the corporate sponsors. Like, it's just a gigantic, bring all the suits together and make them happy and turn this into a big business meeting. I think that's what this is. Great. Then stop trying to make it anything that it's not. Make it a 4-quarter basketball game and stop crying because they scored 200 points. Like, that's not what it's about. Nobody cares. Also, real quick, I know we got to talk about the Kings here, but and I guess this is at least a little bit related to the Kings. LeBron James doing what he did and setting that tone torpedoed the weekend. And not that anybody was like, oh, never mind, I'm not going to enjoy it anymore because LeBron's not playing. But like, that's the guy. That is the guy still in the league, regardless of what you think about him. When the pandemic was going on, there was this big meeting, and I heard Austin Rivers talk about this on his podcast. They had this big players meeting, and they're all talking. Everyone's giving their points, and Udonis Haslem looks at LeBron and goes, "What are we doing? Like, we're all following you." Like, that's it. And so when LeBron doesn't give them enough notice to get an injury replacement. To get Domantas Sabonis in or Norman Powell or whoever it would have been, I don't like setting that tone the day of, where all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's see what this is about. And LeBron freaking James goes, nah, never mind. I'm a little sore. I'm just going to sit out. Yeah. Like, and we're supposed to think it matters? No,
yeah. So I kind of want to play like devil's advocate conspiracy theorist with this too, because like, what if LeBron on Friday, or even before that, Thursday or whenever, because their last game was Wednesday, I think, came out and said, you know what, I still got this ankle injury. I'm just not going to do it. Give my spot to somebody else. Would that have killed the momentum of the weekend before it even started, versus the weekend getting to Sunday before LeBron said, yeah, I'm out, but who cares? We're already here.
I mean, maybe because LeBron is such a singular like force in the NBA space, but no, if he bows out Wednesday and they replace him, I don't think it changes the dynamic any more than it did that an hour before the thing started he went, no, never mind. I just wonder if there was someone in the NBA that went, Bron, just go through the motions like you're gonna do it, and then we'll get to Sunday and we'll just say, oh, pull the plug. Which, if I'm Bron, I'm going, that looks terrible for me, but I don't know. That wouldn't shock me, because then if he taps out, you'd get even if Sabonis does get in, or Norman Powell or Devin Booker, or whoever it was so funny when he tapped out. I think a person from every team in the NBA was like, oh, so-and-so could have gotten in.
Sure.
It's like, no, there was like 2 people who could have gotten in from the West. But I that wouldn't shock me at all, because then you get into, oh, wow, so everybody just makes the All-Star game now? What does it even mean anymore? Maybe that would have been the discourse they were trying to avoid, but I don't know, man.
Oh, well, the circus is over, and I'm actually, for one, I'm kind of glad that no Kings were there so they could hopefully rest up and get ready for what's going to be a huge playoff race. Look, Kyle, before we jump into, because we're the primary focus of this, now that we've gotten All-Star and all that crap out of the way, the primary focus of our conversation is going to be, what do the Sacramento Kings have to do short-term during this playoff race to ultimately make it? But I've made it pretty well known, to the point where getting backlash for it, I don't believe in this roster the way it's constructed. I don't like the long-term direction of this organization, where they're going. So I've established all that. Before we have the short-term conversation, I just wanted to open it up to you and say, or ask you, like, when you look long-term with the construction of this team and where this team is at, how do you feel about the organization and the direction, if they even have one, that they're heading in right now?
Yeah, that's the key phrase there, if they even have one. I feel terrible about it because I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're building. I don't know what they're doing. They just have a collection of players who are good. Domantas Sabonis is an awesome player. He's one of the 20, 25 best players in the league. He's incredible. Zach LaVine is, prior to joining Sacramento, was one of the most efficient scoring guards in the league. Just an unbelievable shot maker. Malik Monk is really, really good in his role, whatever that role is. Keon Ellis is a nice player. Like they have all this, the players individually, DeMar DeRozan, of course, the players individually, you go, oh, okay. But then you look at how modern NBA rosters are constructed, and it doesn't make any sense. You have the Mavericks, who loaded up on like size and athleticism. Those are the 2 words that we say all the time, right? But they went and they drafted Derek Lively, and then they doubled up and got Daniel Gafford at the trade deadline. And then they also went and got PJ Washington. And they also had signed Derek Jones last year, and they go to the finals. The Celtics are the ideal, right? It's just length and athleticism all over the place, and a bunch of guys who can handle the ball, and a bunch of guys who can score the ball, and then you have the top dog in Tatum, but everybody else kind of falls in line in the pecking order, and it's just awesome. They're impossible, right? And then Cleveland has 2 bigs and a ton of scoring, and they just added DeAndre Hunter. It's gonna give him some more size. Like I see it. I see the vision. And you can do that all around the league with all the best teams. OKC as well. Mm-hmm. And then there's the Kings, and it's not okay. Jonas Valanciunas, that's a nice get. I really like that. The Jake LaRavia addition is a nice get, but Jake LaRavia can't be your oh, hey, look, we have more depth at the wings now. We have Jake LaRavia. I don't. So that's the problem. That's a super long-winded way of saying I feel terrible about the direction the Kings are heading, because I don't know what direction they're going, and I don't frankly trust their front office to get them going in the right direction, because I don't think that there's a cohesiveness on what they need, and front office or ownership. Frankly, I don't know. I don't like what it looks like for them down the line. I don't like the fact that they had what I believe to be a 1A in De'Aaron Fox. And if you disagree, that's fine. I'll hear that argument. But they got rid of him, and now what? They traded away their best player and they added Zach LaVine, who is redundant with the players they already had in Malik Monk and DeMar DeRozan. I just don't. I don't get it at all.
This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Hungry Root. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I've had this ongoing problem. I just don't have the time between work, life, trying to eat healthier, plus for me, raising a toddler. I was constantly feeling stressed out. I'd go to the grocery store, but I'd get things that I didn't need, and then up with no time to actually cook, and then sticking to my health goals. Yeah, that's a struggle too. But everyone and everything changed when I discovered Hungry Root. Honestly, it's been a game changer. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all the stress. With Hungry Root, it's like having a personal shopper and nutritionist all in one. They take care of my grocery shopping, recommending meals and groceries based off of my tastes and my health goals, from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. And the best part, every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. I'm talking quick, healthy meals that actually taste great, all delivered straight to my door. It's been a huge time saver and made healthy eating so much simpler. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as I do. For a limited time, get 40% off of your first box and get a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA, all one word, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA. Don't miss out. So long term, we've established that we have issues with the direction of this team, where this team is going, or whatever direction that is. We don't like it. There are going to be major question marks this summer, and I question whether or not people will still have their jobs by this summer, regardless of what happens during this short term. But the Kings are in a position right now where they're a game above 500. They could have been 3 above 500, which is a massive difference. And James Ham laid that out brilliantly on the Insiders. Like, 3 above versus 1 above, especially with the stretch coming up, is a major difference. And they dropped that ball in New Orleans before the break. But regardless, they're in a position to where, because of the way of the West, they're in it, right? They're in the thick of it. And this is the time of the season that you want to hit your stride. You think back to 2023 after the All-Star game. Kings were red hot, arguably the hottest team coming out of the All-Star break, which helped them ultimately secure that 3rd seed, which at the time, I remember after the trade deadline, when all the Kings did was get Kessler Edwards, Kings fans were concerned because other teams were retooling, and they thought, oh, here comes the home stretch of the season. Teams are going to be gunning for the Kings. They don't have the experience. This is where they maybe fall apart. And the Kings were red hot out of the break, secured their spot in the playoffs. This start, to me, like, if you fall into any deeper of a hole, you're in big trouble based off of the teams that are around you, especially the first team you play in the Warriors, who I know you've beaten them twice. They got Jimmy Butler now. They're a formidable opponent no matter what. And this is the time of year where Steph Curry and those guys just come alive, right? So I'm looking at Friday and the start of this second half, quote unquote, or really final third of the season, this playoff race, and thinking, okay, short term, if the Kings want to accomplish their goal, which they're capable of doing, they got to hit the ground running. They got to hit this hard and be ready to go and locked in right away. Do you feel the same way about that? Or do you feel not necessarily that time is on their side, but they can drop a game here or there early on, and if they continue, as long as they continue to ramp up to the final month of the season, essentially?
I guess. Like, I'm a big never say never guy in sports. I learned that lesson the hard way a couple of years ago regarding something with the 49ers. But so I'm a never say never guy. Maybe the Kings, what do they have? They're 55 games. So you got 27 left.
So 27, yeah.
Maybe they go 20-7. Like, maybe. I think they're about a 500 team. Maybe a couple games over, depending on how, some of these 50-50 games go. But I think that's kind of what they are. You mentioned that 22-23 season. Do you know what they were after 55 games that year? They were 31-24. They were 31-24.
Yeah.
Like they were, and then you mentioned after the All-Star break, they won a bunch of games. They got to like 37-25 after the All-Star break. I don't think that's coming, because that team was doing something offensively that nobody could stop, and I don't know why they've gone away from running everything through Domantas Sabonis, but that's a separate conversation. You had Kevin Huerter having a career year. You had Keegan Murray having what has turned out to be a career year for him. You had Malik Monk, who was awesome off the bench. So you had all these pieces that kind of fit together and were taking the league by storm. And they still, and I think it's still worth noting, they won 48 games. That would have been, I think, the 7th seed last year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, yeah, they were pretty good, but they still had like flaws with their roster, right? And they have those same flaws today.
Yes.
They just don't have De'Aaron Fox and Mike Brown anymore. So, all of that is to say, I think they're probably about a 500 team. And I think we can talk about solutions and ways to help. And I think there's a pretty obvious one that we're going to get to. But I also don't think that there's like a magical fix that is suddenly going to make this team a 49 or 50 win team by the time the season ends. I just don't. The roster just doesn't make enough sense to me.
Should we just stop talking about top 6 and really just talk about get 7 or 8?
Yeah, for me right now, it's all about adapting expectations, right? When the season started, I said 51. I'm circling 51, and that's the number I'm staying on. And I stayed there for a while. And then it was really clear, like, okay, I'm off it. I think it was was it the Nets loss? It might have been the Nets loss at home where I went, okay, this is not tenable. 51 wins is not happening. So I'm trying to adjust expectations as we go here. The good news for the Kings, and why I say focus on 7 or 8 right now, is that's a win and in. Mm-hmm. So you need to play really well for one game and to get in, and if you lose, you get another crack to get in. The good news is I don't think the Suns are gonna climb up from behind them, and I don't think the Spurs necessarily want to. Mm-hmm. The Spurs are every Kings fan's favorite NBA writer, Kevin O'Connor, tweeted the other day like that the Spurs are soft tanking and they're still starting Chris Paul over Stephon Castle.
CP3, yep.
And like that makes a lot of that. Yeah, that's kind of what that seems like, right? Like
sure.
They're just trying to maximize the value of having Chris Paul on their roster to try and, whatever young players glean from having him on their team and on the floor with them, like just trying as hard as they can to gain as much advantage while they have him. Wins and losses be damned, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know that the Spurs are super interested in winning. So that's helpful. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're looking at this team and go, what do they got to do to get up to 6 to pass to pull away from Golden State, to B, you got to pass Minnesota and you have to pass Dallas, and then you've got to catch the Clippers. Mm-hmm. And it's not that any of those teams are really awesome, right? Like I think Golden State about a 500 team. I think Dallas with where they're at probably going to finish maybe a little above 500, but about in that range. And then Minnesota maybe a little bit above that. Maybe they're a tier above, but I just don't see the fit with Julius Randle, and I don't think they're going to figure it out either. So it's not that there's anybody in front of the Kings where I'm like, God, they just can't do it. It's like, no, I think you just got to know kind of what this roster is. And I think they're in that 42 to 43 win range. And if you can hop up over Dallas and you pull away from Golden State and you find yourself in a 7-8 with Minnesota, like, okay, you match up decent with Minnesota. Maybe you can sneak into the playoffs that way. But I think if you're looking at this season and going like, okay, what do you got to do to get the 6th seed? Like, let's wait.
Yeah, jumping all the way up to top 6 feels Herculean, even if mathematically it's very possible. And we saw when Doug had this team on a 7-game win streak, they shot up the standings to where they were flirting with 5, like they were in it. So yeah, with the way the standings are, if you suddenly rattle off a 6 or 7 game win streak here, which they would have had, it would have been 4 if they had beaten New Orleans. Like
with Golden State, Charlotte, and Utah coming up.
Yeah, I mean, you would have, like, now you're in it. Right. But that's why that loss in New Orleans is so painful, because you kind of, you nipped that at the bud and you kind of did it to yourself, or you allowed CJ McCollum to do it to you basically. Like, so they're mathematically in it, but talking myself with this team into getting top 6 just feels like I'm trying to speak some crazy fantasy into existence. 7 or 8 though, even with as pessimistic as I am about this team, 7 or 8 does feel achievable just because of the talent that's on this roster. The one thing I think this team has to avoid, though, is they can't make 7 or 8 because somebody else helped them out. We literally got the worst case scenario, right? When the Kings lost to the Pelicans, every team they needed to lose won that night. Like, if the Kings are going to get 7 or 8, they have to do it themselves. DeRozan has to carry him, or Levine, or whoever. Keon Ellis, for God's sake, has to carry them to that spot. They can't just play 500 ball over the rest of the season and hope that the T-Wolves or Dallas falls apart.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. And here's the other thing: if we're gonna feel good about them going into the playoffs, because I subscribe a little bit to what you were mentioning earlier. You have 27 games. That's not a lot of time, but you know what? If you get to, let's see, April, when's that road trip start? March 29th, and you go Orlando, Indiana, Washington, Charlotte, Cleveland, Detroit. If you're playing good basketball by then, And maybe you're still right about 500, but at least you're playing well and you win, like, let's say 7 of your last 8. You get to a few games over, you're the 7 seed. Okay, you start, now we feel good about where they're going. I just have no reason to believe they're going to get there. If you want to be purple glasses optimist, great. Like that's fine. That's your prerogative. But I'm looking at a 28-27 team that I don't frankly really believe in. They beat the Pelicans by 5. They beat a shorthanded Mavericks team. Granted, on the road in overtime, that's a decent win, but you won by 1. And then you had to hold off the Pelicans again to win by 8. And then the next night you lost. Like, okay, you're a little bit better than the Pelicans. Was kind of what that tells me. But on the other hand, I mean, you beat Golden State, that's a winnable game. Charlotte's a winnable game. Utah, that's a winnable game. All of a sudden, you're 4 games over, and then you're gonna have to earn it. And that's like I said, I'm being super long-winded today. Sorry, but I haven't gotten to talk about this with anybody in 4 days. But no, it's like the bottom line for me is if they get that high, they're gonna earn it because you have. This is just. I'm just gonna not even do the whole schedule. I'm just gonna read through. You got the Rockets still. You've got one at Denver. You got the Spurs. You know De'Aaron's going to want to win that game at Golden One Center. You're going to get the best version of De'Aaron Fox that night.
He's dropping 30 minimum.
Oh, minimum. You got to go to the Clippers. You've got the Knicks. You're at Golden State and at Phoenix in games that amount to playoff atmospheres. Memphis, Cleveland, Boston. Like they have such a brutal schedule here. So, like if they get there, they're going to earn it. They're going to earn the hell out of it. But I can't find it in me to lie and be like, oh, I like their matchup coming up with Cleveland and Milwaukee and Boston and OKC. Like I don't. And if you're not winning all those games, you're finishing about 500.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on all of that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback or everything in between, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Whether like you can use FanDuel's live betting feature, for example, during any Kings game through the remainder of the season. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing the Kings for a late game rally or picking a player to hit like a clutch 3 or DeMar DeRozan to score a bunch of points in the fourth quarter to lead them to victory. You never feel like you miss a chance to put your stamp on the game. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $150 in bonus bets, or rather get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So take those $5, put it on the easiest thing you can find. Put it on the Wizards to lose just straight up, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. I'm really glad you laid out that stretch because that's what I was going to lay out too is like the month of March, if you talk about like the golden shovel to bury you, that's it. Like that's what you're looking at. And it's not just the fact that you have these big games. You've got between March 13th and March 25th, so 12 days, you've got 3 sets of back-to-backs. You've got the Warriors and Suns both on the road. You've got at home the Cavs and Chicago. Chicago's probably the easiest game during that stretch, but you play Cleveland the night before, and Cleveland might roll you. And then the worst of them all, Monday the 24th, Tuesday the 25th, Boston and OKC, arguably the NBA Finals on back-to-back nights. Like this is the time that if you're teetering, that's the push over the cliff. But if you give yourselves with these 3 games out of the break, plus a handful of games as well, the San Antonio game, you probably have to go and get that. At least one, if not both of these Warriors games. Like if you can get those games and give yourself 4 steps away from the cliff so you can be pushed 2 or 3 steps back, that's where you can survive. But Kyle, I'm going to be biting my fingernails down to stubs over the course of that 12-day period because that's where I feel like the same way like the 5-game losing streak during that homestand was the death for Mike Brown's job.
Yep.
I'm looking at that stretch as this is where this Kings team dies. And this is where jobs are lost, even if they happen in the offseason. This is where an ultimate judgment decision is going to be made. And because I can very much see a situation where maybe the front office doesn't want to do this because they probably don't feel like they're going to survive it. But if you get to the end of that stretch and you're 2 games under 500 or whatever, you might start looking at that lottery pick that you could potentially be sending to Atlanta and go, okay, what are we really fighting for? Let's make sure we get a pick this year. Like, that's where I think we're going to get to a crossroads of that decision.
Yeah, you had March 14th circled. That's the game at Phoenix.
Correct. So it starts at like March 9th is like the start of that death stretch, but March 13th and March 14th are the Golden State Phoenix back-to-back on the road.
Yeah, so I'm with you. So that's an 11-game stretch from home against the Warriors on Friday, February 21st, this coming Friday.
Yep.
And then Friday, March 14th. You have 11 games in there.
Yeah.
That is Golden State, Charlotte, Houston. Golden State, Charlotte, Utah. Then Houston, Dallas, Denver, San Antonio, Clippers, Knicks, Warriors, Suns. That Warriors, Suns, as you mentioned, is a road back-to-back. So if you can go 6-5 in that stretch, you're 2 games over.
Mm-hmm.
If you go 6-5 in a really, really tough stretch there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, like, man, that gives you 16 games left to make up a ton of ground. And that's not even getting to that brutal stretch we talked about. That's why it's really like I would love to sit here and be like, dude, it's happening. Mm-hmm. And if I felt better about their roster, like if Keegan Murray was playing better, and if they had a second point guard who, and maybe it's Markelle Fultz, maybe he's that dude, but again, not something I'm going to bank on right now. If they had a better backup point guard, and if Zach LaVine or DeMar DeRozan was a better defender or better at moving without the ball or whatever it was, like they're just all the little things that they need to do better, then yeah, okay, let's talk. But I can't get there. I think 6-5 through that 11 game stretch might be a little bit optimistic, but let's call it that. Let's just say they go 6-5, and now they're 66 games in. You're 2 games over 500. That means, hey, yeah, it's probably about what you are.
You're probably still in 9th. You're probably still honestly going
probably
6-5.
Still
You're
hanging out.
Yep. You probably haven't made any ground. So I got 2 more questions for you. The first one is pretty loaded. Like, which player on this roster is the most important player to getting this team to the playoffs? Because you traded De'Aaron Fox, you brought in Zach LaVine. He is your Fox replacement. And so a lot's on that, but we just saw DeMar DeRozan take every shot in the at the end of that Pelicans game, and you lost because of it. Like, is it between those two? Is it somebody? Is it Domas? Like, who is the most important player?
So I'm gonna, So okay, I'm taking Domas off the table.
Okay.
Because I've been pounding the table for the offense to run through Domas and for him to do more offensively, and that's just not. It's just not happening. It's not okay. So he's gonna get his 20 and 15, and that's what it's gonna be.
Sure.
I kind of think it's Keegan.
Oh. Okay.
If Keegan Murray is shooting the ball well and being aggressive offensively, like we've seen him do in like little spurts here and there, was it the Minnesota game? He had 17 in the first quarter and finished with 19.
Yes.
Do you know Keegan hasn't scored 20 points since November 24th? That's outrageous.
He didn't shoot it all in the first half of the Dallas game, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
Like 0 shot attempts.
Right. And this is not to say like, because Keegan is their best defender or second best, depending on how you feel about Keon Ellis, but he's their best wing defender. Mm-hmm. So that's going to matter down the stretch here. And then if he's knocking down shots and he's hitting threes and putting the ball on the deck and taking what's available to him offensively, like I can't remember the last time I saw him get into the mid-range. And that's something that he's been so effective at, posting up, getting in the mid-range. He just hasn't. Like that's just not been there. And I'm not asking him to take 18 shots a game. Like that there's too many mouths to feed.
Sure.
But I need him to not disappear. Can you just not? If you take 12 shots, can you stretch those 12 shots between the first and second half instead of 10 in the first 12 minutes you're on the court and then 2 the rest of the game?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what I want. And if you're getting that combined with his defense, where all of a sudden you're getting a little bit better shooting from the perimeter, and more of a I don't want to say playmaking threat. He's not really going to be that, but just a bigger shot creator.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm asking him to be.
I get you.
Yeah, just don't disappear. That's what it comes down to. Just don't. Can you be around? Can you be visible?
It feels like, not that this is like the make or break season for Keegan or anything like that, but it's like now is the time for you to be that true two-way player that the team thought you were going to be when they drafted you. Now is the time, both ways. We've seen the defense, we saw the offense rookie year. Two-way, bring it together now. You need it.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point with Keegan where I think the bar got set really high that in his rookie year. And we started talking about Kawhi Leonard. And that was and it's really clear to me. He's almost 25. I think it's just kind of it. Yeah. And it's not bad. It's not, if you've got a guy who's going to get you 15 and 5 a night and be an effective 3-point shooter and play awesome defense, you've got a really good player who's going to be in your rotation and in your starting lineup on a title team. But this idea that he's going to evolve into this secondary scorer and this creator, I'm done waiting for it. Like, it's just not him. I think he has the bag to do it. I just don't think that's his mindset when he's on the floor. And when you're 25, I just don't. I think you're kind of becoming who you are as a basketball player. So,
see, I'm a huge Keegan Murray believer, and I always have been. I do believe Keegan Murray can get better, but it's marginal. I don't like, you're not going to see I just don't think it's fair to expect any kind of meteoric rise. Like the same way we've seen, I think we can make the legitimate argument that Keon Ellis has been the best part of the Kings this season. Like just in terms of just his overall play and kind of his meteoric rise and everything like that. Not necessarily the best player, but the best part of the season for the Kings has arguably been Keon Ellis. And I have this picture in my head, Kyle, of, the meme of Jimmy Butler in the bubble just leaned over the table exhausted. Like that's what I think Keon Ellis is going to have to be over the final stretch of this season. Yeah. And that means playing big minutes, and the conversation that's being had that needs to continue to be had and will continue to be had, starting Keon Ellis. I don't envy Doug Christie being an interim head coach. I don't envy it at all. I think it's going to be an extremely difficult position that your front office has put you in. Whose ego do you hurt? Is it Zach? Is it DeMar? Is it Malik? Is it Keegan? Like, who do you hurt to move to the bench, to put Keon Ellis in that spot? Because that's the best chance that the Sacramento Kings have to win basketball games. Because Doug's got to win games to keep the job. The Kings have to win games for the front office to keep their job and to validate ticket prices and everything like that. Like, winning is all that matters at this point. Who goes to the bench for Keon Ellis so you can win basketball games? All
right, bro. Look.
Testify.
I've been on this. No, I've been on this I've been on this train for weeks now.
Yeah, you have.
Look, I know that I agree with everything you just said. This is not something. It is so much easier for me, Kyle Madson, a dude with a microphone who doesn't coach a basketball team and doesn't have to manage personalities and egos and interpersonal relationships. It's so easy for me to be like, yeah, just send one of them to the bench. What are we doing here? So I get it's not that easy, but I also understand that that's like Doug Christie's job.
Yeah.
Your job is to put your team in the best position to win games and not shy away from a hard conversation. Like, that's what, honestly, people always go, anybody could have coached the Steph Curry Warriors to a championship. And it's like, but I don't necessarily know that that's true because there's so much ego management that goes into it.
100%.
And that's when, like, Steve Kerr is not a necessarily a brilliant X's and O's guy, but like the ego management is like part of it. Like that's 100%. What he's good at. And it's what Eric Spoelstra was good at in Miami. So you sit down with, to me, it's DeMar DeRozan. You go, bro, you're 35. You don't defend. We need to wreak havoc defensively. And this is our one button we have to push is Keon. So you're going to come off the bench. You're going to run the second unit. You're going to get all the shots you want when you're in the game. You're just going to play 28 minutes a night instead of 34 or whatever he's at right now. It's probably more than that. But that's just kind of, and that's what it's going to be. And if he's going to pout about it and he's going to be mad about it, like, all right, whatever. Like my job, speaking as Doug, my job is not to satiate egos. Mm-hmm. And if you can't sit down, and frankly, this could go back to the whole team building thing. If the belief is that none of the players you have, whether it's Zach LaVine, Malik Monk, or DeMar DeRozan, that zero of those players are going to respond well if you go, hey, the best way for us to win, to get out of this little like 500 rut, is to start Keon with you coming off the bench. And if every single one of those guys is going to respond so negatively that it's going to derail your season, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Like we're trying to provide a fix here, right? Like that's what it is. And when the first time I said, well, you can't put Malik on the bench, he's their only point guard. Like, well, that's a problem too because he's not. But I don't think he's a point guard. But okay, he's your only like close enough facsimile to a point guard. Okay, I'll rock with that. Well, you can't put Zach LaVine on the bench. You just traded for him. He makes $43 million. Okay, all right, that's fine. Oh, well, you can't put DeMar on the bench. He's a Hall of Famer. All right, well then you're screwed. Then you're screwed. Yeah. You're screwed. Like no, it's fine. If that's it, no, it's good. No, but that's like if that's what it is, then you're here.
Yeah.
Then you're like, yeah, that's a 40 to 43 win team, depending on whether the shots go in or not. And if that's what you want to be, because you want to see Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan and Malik Monk, and they're all together, and oh my God, look at the ISO scoring and this and that. Okay. I have no beef with that. That's cool. If that's what you want, that's fine. It's not maximizing what the Kings are and what the Kings can be. And to last thing, I'm sorry.
No, please.
I'm buggered in your podcast.
Cook.
It's not that starting Keon Ellis is necessarily going to make the Kings go, what did I say, 20-7 in their next 27.
Right.
But it's really clear. I think it goes beyond, oh, they were tired. Yeah, every team's tired. Oh, but they haven't had enough time to practice. Well, okay, I get it a little bit.
That's not going to change.
Right, that's not going to help you get stops, which is the problem. Like the problem to me is not like, oh, they're turning it over too much on offense because they don't know exactly where everybody's going to be. Like, no, they're turning it over on offense because they don't have a normal point guard, and they don't have guys who are used to giving up the rock. Like just to be frank. So that's like. And averaging like 4 or 5 assists, like, oh, hey, remember that one time he had 6 assists in a game? Like, okay, that's nice. It's because the passers are there for him. But you don't have somebody who's going to like create offense like that. And I think it's a flaw with the roster. It's not a flaw of their practice time. So to me, that's the button you can push. It's your last button you can push.
Yes. To
say, we're going to put Keon in the starting lineup. My choice to go to the bench would be DeMar DeRozan because it gives you a lethal scorer off the bench, somebody that can get you 30 off the bench, and you're keeping him more fresh down the stretch of these games. You can even close with him if you want. If you still want his offense in the game to close, and then you got to, play with that and figure that out. But I think it's the easiest call, and it's the most glaring thing, game in and game out. Like, wow, you know what the Kings needed in this loss? Probably like 4 more minutes of Keon Ellis.
How about start the game with a little more defensive intensity and don't fall behind by double digits in the first quarter too? You can start there as well. Look, I was intentional about asking Kyle this question at the very, very end, and it's probably bad producing on my part and some, but we could have spent the entire episode on this topic, and I am going to continue to cover that conversation and hopefully get some other voices and some conversation about that. I'm sure it's going to be a question for Kings practice on Thursday, assuming they have media availability before the Warriors game. Like, this is going to be a topic of conversation throughout this week until Friday's game, and probably even beyond that. But I asked Kyle this intentionally at the end because I knew he was going to cook on it, and because he has been cooking on it and will continue to cook on it with James on the Insiders, ESPN 1320. So you guys are going to pick up this conversation and keep it running throughout this week. We will do the same thing here on Locked On Kings. And as much as I would like for Kyle to take all of his Insiders expertise and just bring it all to Locked On Kings the entire time, I got to make sure this man, I respect this man's time. So Kyle, I appreciate you, brother.
Dude,
Thank you so much for doing this, man.
Yeah, of course.
I love
anytime.
this. It's so much fun. It's kind of a terrifying place to be in for the Sacramento Kings, but it creates pressure, and pressure has the opportunity to give us something good. So I think we're going to be locked in no matter what. So I appreciate you, my man. Thanks for doing this. Looking forward to hearing you and James some more on the Insiders this week, and we'll see what Friday inside the Golden One Center brings.
Always have a great time, man. Thank you.